Hello, and welcome to the Curious Marketer with Vin, hangouts on air devoted to talking with the experts to help you understand how to grow your business. So today we're going to try to help you understand why targeting the right market is critical for the long-term success of your business, and how knowing more about the people who buy from you will help you actually beat your competition, and then give you some simple steps that you can sort of take away to design your business around the people who actually want to buy what you sell. So this is session 2 in the series, The Fundamentals of Online Marketing. So we're joined by Ammon Johns for the second session, and we'll let Ammon say hello, give a brief intro.
Hello, I'm really looking forward to this session. I think we got a few people talking with the first one, and more importantly, thinking about what marketing really is. And this is, last week was kind of setting up the picture. This is what marketing is. This is why a strategy is important. Today is the first time we're starting to get our hands dirty, so to speak, and actually get down to doing something with that. And I think personas and understanding your target market is the very first place you really apply those strategies.
Yeah, and I think for people listening, generally speaking, what I'm after here is, I hear a lot of people say, yeah, I tried that and it didn't work. Well, the reality is that there's a strong likelihood that you either tried it with the wrong people or tried it with the right people, but you didn't understand those people, so you had the wrong message. And so whatever tactic you're using, whatever that strategy is, marketing essentially depends on the fact that you understand the people that you're looking to engage with. But before we get into that, let's just do a little bit of a recap of last session, because I think it's critical that people understand, why do we start talking about marketing? Why do we start talking about strategy? And how do each one of these sessions tie back? And so last session was sort of a definition of marketing. And at the end of the day, my summary of marketing is you got to get found. You got to get known, you got to get found, you got to get chosen, you got to get referred. It's a very simple way of looking at marketing, and there's some complexity that falls underneath it. But in reality, the idea of the field of dreams, where if you build it and you're awesome, they will come, is fantasy. It just doesn't work that way. So when you're actually going into building out a marketing plan that gives you the ability to execute on your strategy, you're putting steps, a logical progression of steps in place to help you achieve your business goals, really.
Yeah. And for me, it's simply that marketing is the scientific and methodical approach to business. Without it, you're just making it up as you go along. It might work, it might not, but it's haphazard. Marketing is everything that is putting numbers to it, understanding what you're doing before you do it. The whole thing of, you don't even make a product, you don't even base your company somewhere until you know what you want to do, where you need to do it, how much access to a good local workforce is going to influence your business, whether delivery networks are going to influence your business. Where you put your business is going to be a huge part of whether or not it succeeds, or at least whether or not it succeeds efficiently. So for me, marketing is absolutely the fundamental.
That's correct. Yeah, and whether it's a science or a logical progression, it's a method. There's steps to take, and even when you're testing things and when you're doing advertising but you're not sure what the outcome is, there's ways to put tests in place to tie everything back to the achievement of very specific goals. And we talked about that. And you understand what your business goals are, understand who you are as a business, if you will, and build out a strategy that helps you differentiate yourself from the market. And we talked about the importance of doing just that, and why building that strategy is connected to, as we progress, building a solid online marketing plan.
Yeah, absolutely. This is it. We are really at step 1 this week, and it's why I'm so looking forward to this one. How to identify and target a market, how to work out where you should be selling, what you should be selling, and how you should be selling it. That's all defined by the market. Because what you want to sell, that's great, but you're not the customer. You're not putting the money up, or at least you're not going to get your money back. The customer is the one with the money. This is the person whose hand has to go into that pocket to bring out the credit card or bring out the cash, or you don't have a business.
This is correct. It's so funny you say this. This is something that we should highlight over and over again. is no matter how awesome you think you are, what only matters is that there's other people out there who agree and they're willing to give you money for that awesomeness, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So getting started, we talked about marketing, we talked about a strategy, and then we talked briefly about getting started. So when we're evaluating a market, you obviously have to decide what your skill sets are. If you have a product, what is that product? If you're services, if you're providing services, what's the delivery? What services are you going to deliver? But you have to sort of take into consideration the people out there that are going to be buying from you. And really the fundamental questions are, starting with evaluating a market, is why you? Why would people be interested in you, right?
Yep. Yep. I mean, I go back one step further, and this is something I call step one. Step one is find dissatisfied people. There's a lot of tendency for people to view dissatisfaction as a bad thing, especially if it's your customers. But actually, all dissatisfaction is an opportunity. This is the core of marketing. What you're looking for is dissatisfied people. Because if you can't find that, there is no market. They're already happy with what they've got. All you've got now is that race to the bottom on price that we were talking about last week, which is always the worst thing you can possibly do. Because you know what? There's some guy in the Philippines right now who can work even cheaper than you can. He can feed his entire family for a week on less than you can live for a day if you're paying rents in New York City. But
yeah, that's actually a great point. When you think about the ability to observe a market, particularly with the internet, the way the internet is constructed, there's a lot of information out in the world with regards to complaints, criticisms, negative reviews, if you will. And so, yeah, you can certainly take that step and look to say, well, where is there a gap, right? What we're looking for is a gap. We need to fill a gap. In some industries, that gap needs to be wider than others, but you're really looking for a gap. And when you find that gap, it usually relates to not just that you're doing something or providing something unique, but that you might be providing something similar in a different way. You use the example of Southwest Airlines, right?
Yeah. This is precisely what we call the law of supply and demand. There is a demand out there that supply is not meeting, that either it just isn't quite satisfying, or it's more expensive than people want it, or it's just failing in some way. That is always step one, because you need that opportunity, the opportunity to delight people in a way that nobody else is doing. And I say delight because delight is where the value is. People will pay more for delight. And that's what you want. You want margins. If your business is going to succeed, then the healthier those margins, the more you can charge for something, the less customers you have to attract, the slower your marketing can have traction. You don't need to hit a home run first run. You can play safe and steady and build up. Also, if your margins are big, you can buy traffic. As long as you know it can convert, you can buy it.
I can't stress this enough. And in the industries that I serve, the services industry, there's a lot of great advice out there that says, don't provide the services that you want to provide. Provide the services that people need. Build a competency around that need, right? So it of course naturally has to be, it starts with you and what your skill set is and whatnot, but you have to look at what people are willing to pay for. And really what you're talking about is, when you look out at the world, the dissatisfaction is, well, I'm not getting my needs met. I'm not able to achieve my goals because I'm missing something. Can you provide that to me?
Yeah. It's every single time somebody says, I wish there were, they are giving away a business idea. And, if you start with nothing else, if somebody out there doesn't have a job right now and is thinking, what could I do? Run some searches for I wish there was a, and there's a billion ideas out there. Now, some of them are, way out in left field, not going to work, but there are some great ideas out there. And what you need to do is, okay, that's what they say they want. How much do they want it? That's the second part of identifying a target market. The first is they must want something. And the second thing is they must want it enough to pay for it.
Yes, that's actually a fairly critical component, because I've lived the experience of having something really cool that I thought was awesome that nobody wanted to pay for. And so you don't have a business if people are not willing to pay for what you offer. It doesn't matter even how valuable it is. If they're not willing to give you money in exchange for it, you don't have a business. It's a very simple concept, but it is one that often gets sort of glossed over as people are launching their business or reinventing themselves or adding services and products or whatnot, right?
We might have a slight technical hitch here. Phil says that I'm not appearing on the screen. He thinks you've either got the white box on your own image or something's gone up with the hang up. I'm not getting on the screen.
I haven't clicked anything.
Quickly select yourself and then unselect, select yourself again to unselect, and that should sort it out. You get a white box around when it's selected.
Yeah. Can they see you now?
Well, hopefully. Let us know if that's fixed it, Phil. If not, we'll have a look at what we can do about it.
Interesting.
You'll have to actually physically select. Okay, sorry about that, people. Yeah. So we know that, the first thing is they've got to want something, and the second thing is they've got to want it enough to pay for it. And the third thing is, of course, that we can provide something that fits the first within the second. It's something that they want, and we can deliver it to them at a price they're prepared to pay for it, within the amount that they want to pay.
That's critical, and it's a really important, sort of second 1.5 step after you decide your strategy. And this is actually overlapping with strategy, because you don't really have much of a strategy if you don't really know who you're targeting. If you don't really know why they would buy something from you, your strategy is kind of lacking, right? So yeah. In terms of we're talking about a business model, we're talking about people. We can talk a little bit about a demand model, and a demand model is interesting because it speaks to, are we a new market, are we an established market? And there's some variations in how you proceed depending upon whether or not you're creating a new market, or you're trying to find your fit within a fairly established market.
There's huge differences. It's much harder to be a newcomer in an established market, because I always say, when people have got a problem and there's no solution out there, then the only thing they're balancing you up against is, do I get this service or product, or do I do nothing? Okay, and it's usually pretty easy to beat nothing if the problem they've got is big enough. If it's a problem that they don't care that much about, then yeah, they're maybe not going to buy a product, or certainly not within this range. But other than that, you've got it nailed. But once people have got an established provider, the research suggests you have to beat that established provider, not just in one dimension, but in two dimensions. I've mentioned this on a couple of other things that I've done on Google+, but you've got to beat them in two dimensions. It's no good just being a bit cheaper than the established player, because the established player, they know. They've got the relationship. They've already given them the credit details. The ease is to just let it go, keep going with the current provider. So you have to beat them radically, i.e. twice the normal price difference, or that you beat them on price and quality, or you beat them on price and delivery time. Two dimensions, two things have to be better for somebody to swap from their current supplier.
It's interesting because price does factor in. Certainly, what the market will pay is important, and you can't just go charging what you want to charge, if you will. So price is, I think, a dimension. It's important only because there is a ceiling and a floor, if you will, right? In the market I serve, for example, I have to look at, what would a dentist pay for marketing as a percentage of their entire budget. I can't just say it's $20,000 a month. It doesn't matter what the value is. That's not what they're going to pay. So I think it's important. It's definitely an important consideration. But that second dimension is really where you want to focus on your differentiation. I think price is important to establish reality. The second dimension, which may be the primary dimension in differentiation, is, why am I different? Why us as a
Yeah.
business? Why as a business? And in order to really figure that out, you kind of have to go into really knowing your market. And this is really the crux. This is something I learned the hard way. And this is something I just don't see a lot of businesses understand. It's not just knowing who is your target, what are they buying, why are they buying. Now you have to sort of get inside that market and really understand the people, right? Market research is great. It gives you some high level numbers and whatnot. What I'm talking about here, though, is when we really peel back the layers, we really want to build an online marketing plan and a presence as we go through this session. We have to start figuring out what makes the people tick in these markets.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I used years ago as an example for marketing was that, right, let's pick something we all know, a computer. And okay, here's what's on the market currently. What am I going to do that's different? And the example I came up with at the time was, do you know what? I'm going to put more memory in my computer, because way back, it was the area where most PCs were radically underdeveloped. You were looking at, people buying new computers with Windows 98 didn't even have enough memory installed on the computer to run Windows 95 at full speed. People with Vista now, if you haven't got at least 4 gigs of memory with Vista, it's never going to run at even halfway speed. You really need about 8. Windows 8, yeah, you need a minimum of 8 to get it going at good speed. You really should have 16 to run Windows 8. Their developers built it with plenty of RAM. Microsoft developers aren't short on computer hardware, so they tend to build something for what's good at the time, very good at the time they build it, because it's going to be a couple of years before it comes to market, and they can't predict how far memory will have advanced and whether they've underspec'd their product for what would have been available. So, this was the differentiation I was going to make in my computers, this imaginary product I'm selling. Now, that lets me talk about the advantages. Everyone had this idea with Windows 98 and 95 that Windows is unstable, it's always crashing. Well, the reason it was mostly crashing, 95% of all crashes on Windows were because it didn't have enough memory. Windows isn't great at handling memory. It's the one weakest point, I'd say, in the Windows operating system. And if you've got more memory, most of those crashes, 95% of them, don't happen. So what I was going to be selling was a more stable computer, hassle-free. That's what a lot of people want from a computer. Now, do I push this? I've got a couple of directions I can go. One, I can specify for the people who want high-end machines, who use their computers a lot. They play games, they spend a lot of time online. Now there I'm going to have to include, a graphics card and some high-end components elsewhere. Or do I go for the business users and say, right, okay, this is a small home office machine, and what I want to do is therefore cut the cost of some of the other components that people don't need as much at home and have that extra memory, so it's more suited for the homeowner, but without just slapping on the cost of all that extra memory. Because here's the thing that was done. When the companies who build computers were doing their market research, they found that what people weren't fussed about was memory, because the high-end users could always go out and buy their own memory sticks and add it to the computer with ease, and the less well-educated customers didn't know the importance of memory anyway. So they would tend to buy machines that were a bit underspec'd in memory, as long as it had the big numbers where they thought it counted: hard drive and processor. So to get the hard drive and processor expensive, they saved money on memory. And that's why people had terrible experiences with Windows for years, is because they were buying cheaper machines.
Well, here's the thing. You touched on a lot of things that we could take off and go on several other different types of conversations. But one of the things that you said that really is critical here is what you're selling there is not tech spec. It's what the tech spec does for the end user. So the end user doesn't want a headache. It doesn't want to crash. It doesn't want a hassle. They don't necessarily care what delivers that as much as they get what they want. And so oftentimes when we look at understanding your market, this is a critical thing, right? This is a super critical thing. I don't sell when I'm talking to a dentist. I'm not talking about marketing services. I'm talking about practice growth. They want to grow their practice. They don't want marketing services. They want to grow their practice. Question becomes, how do I grow my practice? Marketing services is one alternative, right? So then I say, what you want to do is this. Okay, how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to try this, 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 and this, right? The reality is what you're selling is on their terms. It's the goals they want to achieve. And the biggest mistake you can make is sell based on specifications of what you do, a solution, your solution, if you will, right? Why do they put a girl in a bikini on a sports car? Because they're not selling the sports car. They're selling that the sports car will attract that girl in the bikini. That's a simple example. Right? I'm not saying put a girl in a bikini on your website. That's not the point. The point I'm making is that you're selling to something else. Understanding what that something else is what the guy, Tony Zambito, who's sort of the godfather of buyer personas, talks about goals, right? Sell into the goals of your customers. I actually just saw an article he wrote about not ignoring their emotions, because people make decisions not based on logic, but based on emotions. That girl in the bikini is appealing to somebody's emotion, not how fast the car goes from 0 to 60, right?
I think the tightest definition that I ever heard that addressed that said, look, people have things they want and things that they need. And ultimately, you want them to both want and need your service. But if you have to choose, always choose want.
That's funny.
Because people will still not buy what they need often in order to get what they want. And it really is that simple. Years ago,
it's not just simple. It's critical. Critical. What you're saying right now is critical, because want is based on a belief. Need is based on something else.
Yeah. And the biggest example I ever saw that was chiropodists that was next to a hairdresser's. And the chiropodist was going nuts. He said, these women are hobbling past my shop to go and get their hair done. And it's absolutely true. You know, what we buy is what we want, not what we need. There are lots of things that we all know we should have. There are things broken around our home that have been broken for a while, and we know we need to fix them. But we've got that new tablet out next week, and I really, really want that. Or I want to go and do this. Or, you know, there's so many things competing for our attention. And do you know what? Want always, always wins out.
I have so many examples of where selling into need has failed, you know, because of the way my mind works in terms of a logical progression of things is, you know, hey, if you do this, you'll get this. And so therefore you need the first part of that. X equals Y. You need the X. And they look at me and they go, yeah, no, I don't think so. And I used to sit back as a sales guy and go, I don't understand how you can say no. I'm presenting to you that if you don't do this, your business is going to fail. And if they don't see it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I'm just going to quickly highlight Jeff Bond saying that's exactly why education and enabling of clients is also a valuable winning tactic. And that's so true. What the chiropodist needed to do kind of thing was say, look, it's almost summer sandal season. This is the time to get your feet sorted out in time for play to the same kind of variable, because it's what you got to do. It's what you've got to understand. You've got to point out the fact that, do you know what? One of the first things you notice about a woman isn't her hair, it's her walk. When that woman gets up and walks, there is something in the male brain that is drawn to the sway of those hips. And if you got bad feet, your hips ain't going to sway right. Full stop. He could play to the same kind of vanity, and as well make people feel good about making the right decisions. You know,
that's everything. You know, that's right. Appeal to what their desires are. Appeal to what their goals and objectives are. Understanding what those are outside of what you sell, but then fitting what you sell into that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
by the way, vanity is a good thing in terms from a marketing perspective.
Absolutely, and it works in every single market as well. Where you would think vanity doesn't count, it still does. People still want the latest phone. They still want a good car. They want to look good at work. Vanity is always with us because it's our social standing. You know, we want to be a part of our social groups.
Then advertisements for P90X wouldn't have a guy whose body you'll never be able to achieve, no matter how many P90Xs you do. They're not selling you'll avoid having a heart attack. That's not what sells P90X. What sells P90X is the dude that you could wash your clothes on stomach on.
Yeah, yeah, and understanding what appeals to the human psychology is something we'll probably need to come back to with its own episode at some stage. But it's certainly something that you need to do when you're looking at target markets is, can I understand their mindset? Because if you can't, you're going to need to do enough research that you can. Because if you don't understand them, you're never going to be able to sell to them. You're never going to understand what motivates them. And you could even be saying stuff that completely puts them off. A great example of that, Manny St. Victor gave a long while ago. He said about McDonald's. They did this advert where they were trying to attract more young ethnic groups into their restaurants. And they did, I'd hit that about their burgers. I'd hit that does not apply to a burger. McDonald's really misunderstood what the phrase meant and what their demographic meant by that phrase. And so it came across as insulting. It came across as, you know, oh, the big white men on the hill are trying to target us. And no, you know, really, really misfired. There are thousands of other sales where people have got their message wrong. You know, they've just completely got it wrong. There's a lot of things where they used to think that, you know, targeting the men, being quite male chauvinist was really working. And then they discovered that most of the men are their users. But most of the men in their group are over 30. And most men over 30 have an awful lot of their shopping done by their wives. If their wife doesn't like your product, it ain't going to sell.
It's just such a great example. That's understanding who the buyer is, right? That's just a great transition here in terms of understanding who the buyer is, then understanding what makes that buyer tick. But in reality, I'll give you a short little anecdote as well in terms of selling technology. There was a story I read a long time ago. Company developed a product. They went out and did their market research. Typical market research. They hired a consulting firm, whatever. They talked to the C-level person in the division of the business they would sell to only, thinking that the C-level person was the buyer. They did all their market research. They spent all this money developing a product based on the information they got from what they thought was the buyer. In this particular case, it was the chief information officer, or CIO. So then they launched their business. And they go out and they start pitching to CIOs. The CIOs immediately were saying, I don't make that decision. That's 2 levels below. This role makes that decision. And that role had no use for the product.
Yeah.
So it's great that you think you identified the buyer in terms of the CIO, but they're not the buyer. You got to know who the buyer is. Yeah. And once you identify who the buyer is, now we can talk about profiles, personas of that particular buyer. But in your particular example, the wife is the buyer.
Yeah. And even more so, look, I want to sell something online to the over 60s. It's great that I can have a website that's all geared to the over 60s. It's not going to work because what most of the over 60s do is telephone their son or daughter. That's who finds the information for them and recommends things to them. So understanding that part of the thing, that the younger generations are a bit more connected, the older generations tend to ask them. And in business, you see the same thing. Look, the CEO may be the one that you know, makes the ultimate decision. The chief financial officer may be the one that, you know, nods on the budget. But most of the time, it's a middle manager who's been sent out to find the products that they will discuss in a group meeting in the first place. And instead of trying to sell to the end user, who isn't even looking at your product right now, and won't be until it's been shortlisted, and they will all the departments will then look at it, what you need to do is understand a junior executive is coming to my site looking for something that matches the things he's been told to go and find, and providing him with enough information to present on your behalf to all of the right people in all of the different departments, the tech department, the finance department, and the marketing department, if that's where this product gets used.
You know, it's such a great example, and really what you're talking about here is influence in its truest sense of the word, right? Real influence, where you mentioned the not over 60 crowd, because it's the younger generation that's out there searching for things that they need in recommending those things. So what you're talking about is when you build that website, when you build that entire strategy, you have to know there's a primary and a secondary market, right? The primary might be the 60. Can we go direct to the 60 and above? That's question number one. If not, what's that secondary that influences that 60 and over crowd? And how do we market to them? How do we get them to trust us so that they recommend us to their grandmother, grandfather, mom, or dad? But these are the types of conversations. This is one particular example. Well, what I want to come out of this is you have to think these things through before you go diving into building a website. You have to know not only who my direct buyer is going to be, but who are the people that are going to see what I do and refer me or recommend me or influence others to choose me. Because you have to build your online presence for them too.
Yeah, it's absolutely that kind of thing. And do you know what? We've got a lot of smaller businesses in the audience for this show, and I think it would be great if we gave them some hands-on things for how they can build up a few profiles for what they're doing. Because you've probably all heard this thing, and I had this conversation with David Kutcher earlier today. You've probably all heard this thing that, you know, in marketing and sales, it's all about storytelling now. It's all about the narrative. And that's really important. But if you don't have buyer personas, it's like writing a story where all of your characters are entirely two-dimensional at best. None of your characters are real because you don't know anything about them. And your readers can't know anything about them because the author just hasn't bothered. And you know how it sucks in a movie or a book or any kind of story when a character just doesn't make sense and there's no depth to them. Well, this is it. Your marketing needs to have characters.
So the guy that I follow on buyer persona development is Tony Zambito again, and I highly recommend anybody watching to go find Tony and read his stuff. But he literally just came out with an article that said, before you're storytelling, you should be story listening. And here's the essence of the article. When you're telling a story, the objective is to make sure that your audience can see themselves as the lead character of that story.
Yeah.
You got to tell your story. You frame it around the people that you want to resonate with. And the only way to do that is to know their story. And really, buyer persona development, I wrote a simple article about it. I'll link to after this interview, because I've been sort of trying to understand the difference between a profile and a persona for years, about a couple of years. And, you know, it's a real simple thing now. The profile is, I want to target men between the ages of 25 and 30 who work in Arizona. That's your ideal target. The next step now is to say, I got to go talk to 20 of those men, and I got to get inside their head. I got to find out what makes them tick. Why do they do what they do? What fears do they have? What beliefs do they have? What are their goals and objectives? What's a day in the life of these people, right? And now I craft my story to fit into that narrative, right? That's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, my take on how you differentiate, profile tends to be the facts. It says our average user is between 30 and 45. They usually have a salary of this, and they work at this level of company, you know, this size of company, and they live in, you know, cities like this, and this, often within a particular area. That's great. That's a load of facts. Where a persona comes in, think of the profile as a bit like kind of, you know, the mean average. What you're doing with a persona is getting to the mode average. Now, I know it's going back a long way for quite a few of us, myself not least, to go back to maths and remembering the different kinds of averages. But you had the mean average, which is taking the numbers and finding that everyone has 2.4 children. And then you've got the mode average, which says that most people have either 2 children or 3 children. And understanding that, you know, here's a 2-child family and here's a 3-child family, and if we want our product to, you know, be immediately visible to people as something they can use, then yeah, you know, it's no good showing a single child couple. We need to show somebody with 2 or 3 kids so that it resonates and they can see, oh yeah, look, this is easy, and it keeps one child busy while I'm dealing with the other. You know, that's the kind of real world situation that those people understand. With mode averages, we're saying, okay, most of the people are this. Now what couple of subgroups can we get from that? You know, are most people in this job position of a certain age? Where do they live? What kind of car do they drive? All kinds of details. Give them a name, give them a life. Are they married? How many children do they have? Get the kind of details that you can about a typical customer within this group. Then find another group so that eventually you can build up a whole group of profiles that match, well, personas that match several different customers, that kind of covers the gamut of all of your users. And the more you do that, when you're writing your content, when you're pitching your product, when you're determining whether this feature is worth adding, you can now say, okay, well, George would really like that because this is something he can do at the weekends when he's kind of quiet. But do you know what? Mary is going to hate this because, you know, she doesn't have time at the weekends. She can't get the most out of this. She needs it all to be done for her. Do we therefore create another product for Mary that takes care of that? It kind of gives you real world cases. This is the idea of putting actual characters into your stories, because now you can understand their stories. You've got a narrative for each of these personas, and you can work out your place in their story. Because when we hear tell your story, that's great if you're Apple. Understanding the Apple brand, great. There's Apple fanboys. Understanding the Android brand, great. It's Google. For most businesses, this isn't something that is that kind of purchase. I don't care how good the socks you produce are. Nobody's going to, you know, identify themselves with what those socks are right now.
You know, stories. Yeah, stories keep popping up wherever you go because stories are great. Stories provide a narrative that people can sort of relate to. The word choice of your is where I run into trouble, and that is it. Don't tell your story, tell a story. Now, there's no question that your story is going to have some relevance at some point, but it's down the road a bit. You know, maybe it's do I want to work with this person? What's their story? Up front, though, it's tell a story. What's the story of the people you're trying to attract? Tell that story, right? So the story is great. Whose story is really where rubber meets the road. Now, the transition here for me, we could talk about this for months because it's really that involved a concept. What I want out of this conversation is for people to understand that they need to at least start thinking of this before they go diving into website design, for example. The question now becomes, why? Right? I know why. But I ask you, you know, why is this important? Why does it matter to target the right people and then understand what makes those people tick?
Because otherwise you're wasting your time. I mean, there is, you know, that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, you also can't make it reach into its pocket to pay for a drink. Now, the horse uses the water, but it's the riders or the farmers that you've got to pay for the drink. How do you make the farmer understand that this is a great place for his horses to get a drink? Why is this going to be useful to him? Yeah, that's how you come up with the market. And
Exactly.
you've got to understand the story. You've got to understand why this is a better solution for him from his perspective. And remember what we said earlier about the difference between what they need and what they want. How can we make them want this? Or do they already want it, even if they've never expressed it? Do you know, one of my favorite examples is Apple's iPod, because everyone thought that there were lots of MP3 players around. There were lots of music players. Everyone had produced one. And Apple went a completely different way. We all knew what an MP3 player was. It was a tiny little device, the smaller the better, that held about 20 to 50 songs. That's what an MP3 player was. And every day you were supposed to, reselect the songs you were going to have that day, or you were going to get pretty bored by the end of the week. And Apple understood that what people really wanted was to have enough range on that no matter what happened during their day, they understood that often by the end of the day, you were in a completely different mood to what you thought you would be the night before when you were putting the music on your iPod. By having your entire collection, or at least a big selection of music on that, that was something for you, whatever mood you were in at the time. Whatever you were in the mood to listen to, it was there. The idea of being able to put your whole collection on and it last a couple of days, the battery, that solved a problem people had never even really voiced.
This is the thing. So the next session, we're going to be talking, I think, about website. We're going to be talking about overall web presence and online presence, right? Here's where I really started to fully appreciate the concept of a buyer persona. I went to a website about 1.5 years ago. I was looking for something. I don't recall what it was. But I went to the website, I started reading the homepage. And as I was reading the homepage, I realized something. What was in my head was on that homepage. Okay? I'll say that again. What was in my head in terms of what I needed was literally the copy on that webpage. Literally. It was almost a scary situation because it was almost word for word what I was looking for. So whoever crafted that copy understood exactly what they were selling and who they were selling it to. Now, I didn't buy anything because I didn't really have a need. I was looking for knowledge more than anything. But I was amazed at the synchronicity between what was in my head and what was on that page. And what you're talking about with Apple, and why I think Apple was so brilliant amongst the many big brands, but what we can bring into our own marketing strategy as smaller businesses is when somebody sees you, whether it's in person or online, but since we're talking about online down the road, we'll talk, when someone goes to your website, when someone sees your social media stream, it needs to speak to them. They need to feel like you understand them. So when they go to your website, they don't want to hear we. They want to hear you. You're trying to get this done. This is how you do it. The point is you can't even begin to start to craft that kind of an online presence if you haven't identified who you're targeting and what they stand for. This is my point.
Yeah, absolutely. And furthermore, what their worries are, why they haven't already solved this, understanding what their objections have been or why they are now trying to sort this, the thoughts of the minute, that's so important. Understanding where their mindset is at right now. And I published an article a while ago which is about how people shop online, and if it's a product you don't know, you start off with very general searches. Say you've decided you want a new hobby, you're just getting into digital photography, so you might start with searches about digital photography and digital camera. You haven't got one yet, digital cameras. What you're looking for at the moment is just a broad overview. If a site is trying to sell you a camera straight away, miss by a mile. They haven't understood the customer who's searching for digital camera isn't trying to buy a digital camera yet. If they were after a camera, they'd have specified a make, or they'd have specified some detail about the camera. They'd have narrowed it down. The fact that this is still so general tells you that they haven't got a clue yet. And what you need to be doing, providing the overview. This is a chance to build trust, to show that your knowledge of this market is better than anybody else's, and that you're more honest about it, that you're not trying to just sell them the most expensive camera you can, but that you're trying to sell them the best digital photography experience that you can, and they can just happen to buy a camera from you that's in line with that philosophy.
So you mentioned David Kuchar, one of the case studies that you and I actually had we saw, we viewed it. It was one of David's studies where he talks about intent-based search engine optimization. I don't want to get into the topic of search engine optimization right now, but what that says to me, when someone says intent-based, they're saying, where are we, or where's the audience in terms of their current intention? And are we meeting them at that point? So this person is ready to buy. This person is just searching and discovering. This person is just looking for some knowledge and will never buy. You know, are we meeting these people at the right place at the right time? And the only way we can do that is if we know what their intent is. We can't do intent-based anything if we don't understand what their intent is.
Yeah. And let me bring up Alex's question here, because she says, so to be an effective marketer, are you saying you have to be empathetic, or can you just be a great researcher and connect the dots?
Both.
It's a bit of both. Yeah, I would say that Google have been very, very good at defining intent and understanding UX and things like that. But these are geeks. Come on. Everyone knows geeks aren't very good with people. They're great with tech. But being able to work out the systems for rewarding the right kind of result for the right kind of moment is exactly where it's at. So I would say that, yeah, there's a bit of both of that. Your salesmen tend to, usually good salesmen are empathic. They're very good storytellers. They're good at connecting with people. That's what makes a great salesman. If you're a marketer and you're not great with people, but you're great at the numbers, you can be a very successful marketer. But when you're writing your copy, get the sales team involved, get the customer service team involved. These are the people who can tell you what questions people are asking, what objections they've got. And also, in the case of your salesman, what was the right answer? What won them over? What answered that issue they had? Because sometimes the issue people raise isn't really the issue they have at all. Remember what we were saying last week about people saying they hate marketers because we're all liars. But of course, why they really hate marketers is because we often show them their own hypocrisy. We can. A good marketer is very honest, and unfortunately, that means he sometimes shows you the not so nice parts about yourself, that you like to think you do this, that, and the other, and actually, you all support quality. You all want everyone to have a good standard of living, but then again, you buy from a company that is massively known for underpaying its staff, or you buy from a big label that you know employs child labor in the third world. The fact is, we're not always very nice people, and marketers unfortunately kind of remind us of it sometimes.
And you know, data has a place, research has a place, on and so forth. The empathy doesn't necessarily have to be the touchy-feely version of empathy. It's the ability to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and imagine what's their intent. Why would they need what we have to offer? What is going on in their life? How can I reach these people? What would they see from me when they actually see me? How would they respond? How would they feel? That's why empathy, you know, a critical tool in the arsenal of an effective salesperson, because you've got to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. But here's the big thing. Listening becomes key. And so when you go out and you decide you want to design your website, if you're already an established business, go talk to a couple of your customers, right? Go find out what do they want to hear? What do they want to see? What kind of content would they like? How do they buy stuff? How do they live? When they get up in the morning, what do they do? When they go to sleep, it's like a conversation at a bar. It's qualitative. It's not quantitative. You're trying to get a sense of their personal journey, if you will, not a buying journey, a personal one.
Yeah.
Right? How do they feel when they wake up and proceed through the course of their day? The more you can get of that kind of information, now you take that information and you craft your homepage on your website a certain way. You craft the sub pages on your website a certain way. You stream certain types of content and conversations on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Google Plus, right? You write certain kinds of blogs to answer questions that help people navigate a day in the life. This is why online marketing fails, because people haven't taken this step. How do I know I failed? Because I didn't take these steps. I learned the hard way.
And people sometimes forget that online and offline mix. They mix in the real world all the time. How many people have never had a conversation in a coffee shop or in an office environment about something they saw online? And everybody does. You know, when you want to get something online, I bet you've at some time asked a real world contact, even if you've contacted them through the internet. It's somebody you feel you know and trust in the real world for their opinion on something. And people get real people's opinions all the time on things that they buy online, unless it's a very small purchase that they don't feel there's any risk to at all. But this is it. Understanding that influence and online and offline, it all comes back to the big picture of marketing. And sometimes the best thing is what we call a holistic marketing campaign, which is to understand that your physical presence in the world, you know, your point of business, whether that's a shop, whether it's a service provision, whether it's your headquarters, whether it's a regional office, is one part of that. What advertising is on the streets? Do you have billboards? Are you on the radio? Are you on television? As well as the people looking you up. And why are they looking you up? There's these adverts out there. Well, one thing we've seen really, really successfully for the big companies in recent years, look, a TV campaign, just a pretty simple one, for a couple of months is going to cost them $25 million. That's how much one TV ad costs for a couple of months. And most of these, they are saying, look us up online, search for this, come to our website here, because that enables them to put a longest message than that 30 seconds or 60-second commercial. And that worked really well. One of the first companies to do that was Volvo, but BMW and most of the car industry did that. And the car industry have been very, very successful at advertising for a long time. They know what they're doing. They're selling a high-end product, and it's all about making you want it much more than you need it. Do you really need a Jaguar? Do you really need a BMW? No, most of the time you don't. But it's about what it says about you. And cars are wonderful. You know, let's face it, cars are 4 wheels and some passenger room and an engine. But there's infinite variety. The fact that it started off where you had, okay, we've got coupes and saloons and buses, you know, that's plenty of range. And now look at the subgenres. Look at the thing between a sports utility vehicle and a minivan. And
it goes back to the need versus want.
Yeah, so infinite varieties out there. This is where we're talking about niche marketing. But you know, understanding that there's room for all of these things. I do want to bring up a question that came up much earlier by Mary, who said, for a business that's trying to expand into a new market, do you have any suggestions on how the business can learn about the target market's goals and pain points? And I think it'd be nice for us to have one sort of real world example to put in here that will probably apply to a lot of people in our audience. Sure. I know we've got quite a few service providers. Do you want to have the first bat at that, or do you want me to dive straight in?
No, go ahead.
I think one of the very first things, I've said this before, use social media for the one thing it's really good at. It's good at listening to people in mass, right across the internet. So, you know, let's pick an example here. So let's say you're a new insurance provider. It's not like there's any shortage of insurance providers out there. What are people's pain points before you even come up with what your product is going to be and what your USP is going to be? Remember, when we're talking about a unique selling proposition, selling is one of the important parts, and selling depends on value, and it's not your values that count, it's your customers.
Yep.
So find the thing that people are dissatisfied with right now about insurance, and that's a selling point. And if it's the only one to target in that, it's a unique selling point. So that's one of the strongest ones. Quality is always up there. And perceived quality can be different to real quality as well. So run some searches. Find out where people are talking about insurance on social media and look for the negatives. There's several tools out there that can help you find those kind of things very well. I'm not going to do a plug for any particular tools right now, because the right tool partly depends on you, partly depends on the market at any given time. There's a lot of tools out there. Try several. Most of them have a free trial. Try them. Test them out, because you'll find out what works for you. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't waste too much time.
There's another thing that she can do, Mary, that works actually pretty well. It was advised to me a while back, and I didn't do it, and I should have. But very simple. Pick up the phone and you call a few. Somewhere between 10 and 20, 5 and 15. It doesn't have to be a huge volume. But you simply introduce yourself and say, "Look, I'm starting, or I'm gonna start to offer a certain service to the people that do what you do, and I'd just like to take a few minutes of your time and talk to you about why it would matter, or talk to them about themselves." But you just pick up the phone and start calling some people. I mean, you can all look to see if you know anybody that knows anybody, because that's the easier way to get them to take the time to help you. But you'd be surprised how many people will actually take that call, because you're phrasing it in such a way that says you want to make sure that whatever you do helps them. So you're asking them for a favor. Hey, can you just help me understand a little bit about you?
I think one of the things that a lot of people, they do quite well is, small businesses often ask their friends and family, "Look, I've got this. What do you think?" The trouble is, they're friends and family. They don't want to hurt your feelings. These are people that like you and want to be nice to you. So sometimes what you really kind of need to do is ask friends of friends that you don't know. Ask your friends if they will hand out a questionnaire to 5 people who they know bought insurance last year. Do you know what? There's no harm in asking. It might work. If you've got an insurance company already, send your employees home with 10 sheets that they can hand out to distant friends and family, because it's in the company name. They're going to be honest about it. It's not a case of looking after their friend.
This is also one of those areas Ammon and I experienced directly, and that is, you can actually use social media engagement to just get inside a circle of these folks. Join a community and just start talking. Just start talking. Build a relationship, and the relationship will reveal, if you're listening correctly, the relationship will reveal what is it that these people need, and how do they need it? What language do they use? And the language is a critical thing as well. If you're looking at social media, you can start to see how they say things, right? It's not just understanding what their pains are, their problems and needs are, but how do they talk? What words do they choose to use to describe things? Social media is great for that, which you didn't have years ago. Now it's a great instrument. So you can go out and use listening tools, but you can also just go join a community on a place like Google Plus and see what the conversation is. Do a search on the profession in that industry, see what their posts are. Go to the professional posts and see if there's a conversation unfolding. And you start to get a sense of how these folks think. And that'll give you a sense of whether or not you have an ability to start a division of your business or add an additional service. But if you do, how? What is it that you want your page to say? And that's really where we're going with this. It's really all about the language, right?
Of using social media as well is you are now identifying the demands in a place where you've already got a persona attached. You can find out where they live, how many kids they've got. Their stream tells you so much about them. And what you do is you pick the most common features of, 4 or 5 groups where these obviously go together. There is definitely a stereotype here. That's kind of what you're building, is a decent stereotype that feels real of various target markets or various potential customers. And then, which ones work. Remember the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. 80% of your business comes from just 20% of your market. 20% of your customers are doing most of the work. So don't be afraid to focus on the most profitable, the most rewarding. the ones that will mention you most. Focus first where it delivers the most, then pick up the pieces.
So maybe we'll add this to the next session, because it was something I wanted to talk about. We did talk about it briefly in the first session, but that is not only who you want to target, but who don't you want to target. But in the end, since we're at the hour mark for this session, the next session is going to be about sort of creating an overall online presence that'll give us a map into the specific steps, including website, social media, and so forth. But to sort of recap, what we're talking about is, why marketing is important. What is marketing? The importance of building a strategy, and really the overlap between the market you're going to serve in that strategy related to what you do. And I can't stress enough, I mean, this conversation is 100% super critical to anything that you do with regards to whether it's online or offline marketing, anything you do with regards to business planning. Understanding people, if you don't get anything else out of this session, understanding people that you expect will give you money, or whatever it is that you provide, is essential. It's not a nice to have. Essential. I can't stress that enough. And we're going to keep highlighting this as we go forward. The next session, again, as I talked about, we're going to talk about an overall online presence. What does that mean? How it ties back to a strategy, how it ties back to a niche, how it ties back to understanding the people. Every word that you use, does it fit their narrative? Until you understand that narrative, you're not really doing marketing.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to next week. Hopefully everybody else is too.
Thanks for joining us.